From Bravery Media, this is Appendix B, candid conversations about higher ed in 10 minutes or less. And now here are your hosts, Kristen Van Dorn and Joel Goodman.
So, Kristen, one of the things that I keep seeing, well, I guess the last 15 years of working in higher education, is this tendency for a lot of institutions to want to just like build something that they think is really cool internally, but they don't actually have any data around that being something that's productive. And so like all this time and energy gets put into building something like, I don't know, like back in the day, it was like the giant social media feeds that people wanted to have on their homepage. And it was just like, we need to aggregate all of this stuff. And when you look at the actual returns on that, it's bad. I mean, like generally you're just shoveling people off of your website. But I think overall, like there's this issue when it comes to stuff like, I don't know, events calendars or news feeds or these like shiny new things too that a lot of schools think are going to like solve all of their web problems. But then no one shows up. Like no one actually like comes to see these things because there's like no plan around how to market them whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of shiny new features that higher education wants to jump on board with. Like, I think we're probably a year out from hearing an institution say they want their own NFT. You know what I mean?
Already missed the boat on that one.
Right. But I mean, a lot of them are still talking about chatbots. Do they need a chatbot? How will the chatbot interact with students? What kind of features do they need to be thinking about? And they're already late to the game on chatbots, but they don't understand what chatbots actually do on their websites and how the AI will crawl their site and provide content for students. So their content has to be good in the first place in order for it to work. But I think that gets back to the social media feed too, or the strategy about let's build it and then people will show up for it isn't a thought about where they are in the trend. It's just, how do I get into this? How do I ride this wave? And they're usually late adopters, and there's nothing to capitalize on anymore.
And then I just wonder how they think any of their audience is going to like hear about this cool thing that they built, you know, or I think about like, I don't know, a lot of times this comes up a lot during design processes where, I mean, like just with clients that we've had. And I mean, even when I worked in-house at a university, but this idea that we need to have like something that's really fresh all the time, right? Like we need to have photos that are randomized, or we need to like constantly, well, we need to have something that's dynamic, which means moving, you know, like a slideshow or a carousel from back in the day. But the reality is that people don't think about your website in their normal day to day. And so like, how do you get them to come back? You're not building things like no one looks at no one's going to be like, ooh, I'm going to refresh this page to see what random photo I get. You know, only people that work at your school are going to do that. Prospective students don't care. They're there to get something done. Like, and you know, what's being built in to kind of incentivize someone to come back to your website and look at these things or like figure it out? Like it's because it's not these like shiny features.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's one thing that's going on, which is that a lot of faculty and staff have been trained in the mindset of engagement, like civic engagement or engage your community. And then they try to translate that to marketing engagement, which means something entirely different, but they're blending those two concepts together. So they think on a marketing page, they're supposed to have a game or an activity or something that's going to keep people coming back in order to increase their brand salience or the thoughts and judgments and feelings people have about their brand. But in reality, those marketing gimmicks are taking away from the actual engagement that they need to spend nurturing in their current student population. These are very different concepts out in the world, but somehow on higher education campuses, they get muddled together like they mean the same thing.
You have to put yourself in the position of remembering that there is an outreach aspect of this to get people to come in house. So, setting up a new events calendar is great, sure. But if it's not for your internal community and it's meant to connect people with what's going on, how are they gonna know that it's up? How are they gonna know that it's there? What are you giving them as an incentive to follow it? Like you have to supplement building these things, or I guess complement and support building these things with going out and talking with your actual community or with your prospective students, or, and not in this aspect of like, well, hey, we got this new thing that we built just for you. Yeah, I mean, because still, like, they're not really going to care about the tool aspect of it or the shiny aspect as much as, we have this benefit for you and we want you to come. And then that's another point. It takes active engagement all the time. It's not a one and done. You don't build it and then expect everyone's going to come back and, on their own over and over and over again.
Well, and that's also getting to a point of, is there a point to having these components or these feeds to begin with? Because, sometimes when they build something like a new calendar, a new blog, and they're feeding it with content or social media profiles, they expect their future students to want to use this content, and that somehow this is going to amplify or accelerate their growth. But the truth is that students come to a higher education website or web environment with a specific task in mind, and they don't necessarily want to be distracted by a different feed or rethink the business model of higher education where suddenly it's a news outlet too. They don't see it that way. They see their job is to get something accomplished. And so turning your website into a news outlet is only going to confuse students about if they're in the right place, if they're looking for the right content, if the content that they're looking for is easily accessible. It's all this struggle between whether or not the student is understanding what you're actually trying to do.
Well, and I think there's an expectation of those prospective students that anything they come in contact with is built for that purpose, right? It's built to help them figure out that question, that, that process of getting into your school. And so if you do things like have a new student blog or start putting a lot of news stories or student profiles or things like all these things that were touted as best practice, 5 years ago, we got to have all these student spotlights and stuff. They're not bad things to have, but they have to serve a purpose of solving those things that prospective students are looking for. And they're not there to be informed about your students. Like they're there to find a program that they want. And so if you're posting a student story or a news story, it had better link into that content that's relevant to that student, that prospective student, and it had better further them along that journey.
So imagine that you're a store that sells clothing and your user-generated content, you use that for your brand. Generally, those are people that are reporting on the fit of clothing, on the circumstances in which they wear the clothing, on the texture or the comfortability of the clothing. But it all comes back to the sale. In higher education, when we are encouraging user-generated content, it tends to not be as closely tethered to the program, or it tends not to be tethered to the action we want students to take on the website. So it'll be a feature about a student that's won an award, or a student that's done really great things. Or if students are generating their own content, it's about like what they enjoy on campus, but it's not necessarily tying back to the exact action that you want a prospective student to take.
Yeah. So an outside of higher ed example that recently happened. So my wife and I recently moved to Louisville, Kentucky, and there's a ton of vintage shops around here, just a whole lot, or like, antiques malls and stuff. And we were following one on Instagram, and apparently they have this service where they will rent out their like vintage clothing for photo shoots, or their the furniture and stuff that's in there too. And then they start using that on their social media accounts, like the photos like taken of people, from these photo shoots, like photos from these photo shoots. And it's really confusing because you're there to like see a specific thing and find out, do they have the thing I want? Like, do they have any new mid-century modern furniture in today or, whatever. But all you're seeing is these weird, like, amateur models like reclining on stuff, and you don't know what the thing is for. And like I think that kind of gets to what you're talking about, at least a part of what you're talking about on the higher ed side of things. Like when you do use user generated content in ways that aren't strategic, or even when you start implementing these features that you think are really cool, but you don't think about how they further that core journey or those core few journeys that you want to kind of foster on your site, you just end up confusing whoever visits the website. And that's enough to like kind of stop someone dead in their tracks, and they'll just leave. Like, why are they going to stick around if they don't know what's going on?
Yeah, I think that overall, when we're planning these things, these new engagement activities that are going to take place on a higher education website, we're not thinking about who's actually coming to that website, or we're planning for the people that we hope come to the website, but oftentimes it includes everyone from prospective students to current students to families and parents to alumni to donors, and that blanket umbrella of people that are supposed to come and interact with these tools, those tools no longer make sense for connecting to a specific call to action because they're meant for anyone to enjoy. They're meant to inspire delight, but they don't quite get there because all they're doing is interrupting what the person actually came to the website to do.
Thanks for listening to Appendix B. If you've got thoughts, we'd love for you to share them on Apple Podcasts or here in the comments section. For more information, please consider subscribing to our newsletter. It comes out once a week, and we will be back in about a week. Thank you.